All right, everyone. The Boston Globe, along with some other so-called media outlets, are getting together to do like a nationwide editorial in a couple days where they're all going to condemn basically the war on the press. Now, this is a newspeak term. There is no war on the press. The press is more than corporate media outlets, and it's not a war to criticize them. So this is just total newspeak. This is literally 1984 linguistic terminology. It is propaganda. It's being used for a reason. These people, they're very good at using propaganda. The term fake news evolved out of CNN and these groups using that label for the alt media. It was a very good tactic. The only thing, they underestimated the alt media's ability to turn it around and aim it at them and say, hey, now we're the ones that actually do the journalism now. You know, people going out and, some dude from InfoWars probably does more in the way of investigative journalism. People like O'Keefe and so forth. Those are the real journalists of our era. The people from these groups, if a politician pays them enough, they'll shelve a story. So they can't be trusted. Nobody does trust them, and their ratings are plummeting for a reason. But they're going to try to declare there to be a war on the press. Specifically, they're predicating this on the observation that Trump criticizes them. Criticism is not a violation of your First Amendment rights, especially if it's a corporation, even of an individual. If I sit here and I criticize someone from the press, a pundit or whatever, that's my right. I have the right to criticize them. They defame and criticize the alt media on a constant basis, both in general and in specific. Sometimes it rises to the level of literal slander. So how is it a war on the press for those same people to criticize the corporate entities that are constantly trying to erode the First Amendment? The only erosion of free speech within this country or of press rights is when people remember years ago when Dianne Feinstein came out and said, well, I think people shouldn't be able to blog without a license from the government and a journalism degree because they're engaging in activities of the press. So I think it's dangerous for the little people to be able to report on things. Basically, smaller groups that they lack the press credentials in the White House press corps, they shouldn't be able to conduct actual analysis, talk about news, do write-ups and stuff because the First Amendment doesn't protect that. Now it does. The press is the printing press. It's the distribution of back then it was basically books, books and papers and billets. Extended from that, any technological means, especially of the distribution of material that takes place outside of the context of free speech, which is interpersonal. It's the freedom of the press, ultimately. It's not free speech that protects my right to publish a book. It's the freedom of the press. In the most literal sense. It's not freedom of speech that protects what I'm doing right here. It's the freedom of the press within the First Amendment. Specifically, any nonverbal interpersonal means. That means I'm speaking to a large crowd of people, it's freedom of speech. I'm handing out books to a large crowd of people, it's freedom of the press. And you're making a video. Technology, it's indirect. I'm not actually sitting in front of you. I'm engaging in the activities of the press. The only war on me, as a member, therefore, of the press, undergoing the activities of the press, is when the legacy media itself, behind the scene, attempts to deplatform people like me and people that I subscribe to, and alt tech sites and things like that distribute, they're literally publishers of material at this point. That's the only war on the press that exists today. So yeah, there is definitely a war on the press. They're not actually going after it. They're fixated on Trump said something mean about CNN. This is a big problem. It's a war on the press. Look, you are a small component of the press if you're in the corporate media. A few thousand of these larger outlets all told. There are millions of people within the press at large that engage in the activities of the press whose total collective audience drowns out CNN 1,000 times over. That's the truth. That is the true press of today because these older groups have existed too long and have too many ties to the establishment to be counted on to fairly report. They're politically partisan, inevitably. Now, yeah, so is most of the alt media, for all intents and purposes. I know I'm not maybe a partisan, but I am ideological in my summation of events that are going on. I'm a libertarian. I believe in small government. So naturally that at the moment that slants towards the Republicans being something I would approve of. At other eras, it's been the Democrats. 10 years ago, people would have thought I was a liberal if they didn't know what libertarianism was. It's like anti-war, don't want to see gay people mistreated. I would have sounded a little bit like a Democrat 10 years ago to you. If I were making videos, in fact, you can look back through the videos I made like in 2009, don't I sound a lot different ideologically? It's not because my views have really changed. It's because I was interested in other issues because they happen to be more culturally relevant at the time. The current cultural relevance, censorship is literally #1 in protecting the internet. Who's trying to do that? Libertarians and some Republicans. None of the Democrats are. They come out constantly and talk about how terrible the online communities are. They need to tax it, they need to regulate it, they need to regulate speech much more because it's a big problem, this foreign propaganda, which largely doesn't exist. That's the other element of the actual war on the press. The legacy media attempting to convince Ma and Pa America that there is such a systemic problem with Russian propaganda or with bigots or whatever that they need to insert censorship online. The real reason is that they want to knock independent creators out of the way so that they can be the online news world. Because they're lagging way behind. They didn't take online news seriously. The term, for anyone that doesn't already know this, I think I've mentioned it once before, the term legacy media that I use, and by the way, I've seen it crop up in odd places lately. I think the term has taken off and sort of taken root. Keep using it. Anytime you talk about them, call them the legacy media. Let's get a little bit of a sub-movement going. The term legacy media comes from, I believe, a 2003 report into how the old, like the cable and newsprint groups, would inevitably fail because they weren't properly making the transition to the online world. It mentioned, who was it there who said that the internet would just be like the fax machine, it'd never be anything significant. It wasn't until the late 2000s, really, that the yellow journalist, politician crowd started to make the move to the online world fully. They hadn't focused any substantial research. So like they early on, they had like a Facebook page. Like by 2010, they all had a Facebook page. Maybe they were on YouTube or whatever. They had a website and stuff that you could interact with, but they didn't put in particularly a large number of resources. They never tried to stream their resources. It wasn't 2012 the first time that even like YouTube streamed like debates? Or was it 2010? I don't think they were doing that in 2008. No, they didn't even have live streaming at the time. I think it was 2012. That's fairly recently. That's less than a decade ago. Think, these people didn't make the transition, and so alt media and alt tech grew. We didn't have to compete with CNN at the time. They were an afterthought. Nobody gave a fuck what they did. YouTube has to free up money, make them priority creators, and deliberately promote their material just to let them compete with individuals with webcams. That's what's happened at this point. Think of it. Multi-million and sometimes billion-dollar corporations have to get corporate welfare and corporate affirmative action from the big tech sites to compete with people that sit in their fucking bedroom. So yeah, the real war on the press is that they're trying to knock all of the independent commentators and analyzers and influencers, so-called, out of the way. They're starting, specifically, Laura Loomer, I'll be reporting on that later, Gavin, InfoWars, all of these people have something in common. They do actual journalism on the ground. They're trying to undercut independent journalism, actual first-hand reporting first. That's where they're focusing. First they focused on the money. Adpocalypse, deplatforming people from like PayPal and stuff. Now they're going after anyone who in the real world attempts to conduct journalism who is not controlled by a multinational corporation and thus is in the pockets of lamestream politicians. That's what they're going for first. After that, I can guarantee you they're going to go after the moderate voices that simply rant about free speech. They're going to go after people like me. They're not going to go after actual extremists. They want them to be online to continue, in order to continue convincing people that we need censorship. They need extreme voices online. They need them to be as visible as possible. Right now, they're a tiny minority because there is no actual problem with extremism online or with foreign propaganda. They're going to knock all of us out of the way if they can. If the moral panic continues, it will be moderate voices. It'll be people who actually have a working brain cell who get deplatformed first. That's why they kick Gavin off, say he's an extremist or something, and yet there are people who are actually bigots, and it's like, hey, yeah, they haven't broken any rule. Everything's fine. They don't even give an explanation anymore to half the people they're banning because there is no logical explanation. They didn't break any rules. They just kick them off and don't allow them to appeal. That's what's happening. Who do you think is behind it? Legacy media. They're tired of competing with the alt media because they're losing power in cable so quickly they will no longer in a few years to a half decade have the money necessary to make the online transition they need. They'll have to downsize over and over. They'll go into death spirals. Some of these groups already are. CNN is in a death spiral. Their audience is steadily leaving. So naturally they need to branch out online in order to get that money. Well, they can't do that if they have to compete with 1 million people. YouTube, remember that time? Remember when YouTube, during Adpocalypse, it started declaring that some videos that couldn't be monetized, or videos, they started to pull in less revenue. You know why that is? They ran out of ads to serve. So these groups, CNN and stuff, if they're streaming, they want that ad revenue. They don't want to give any ad revenue to independent creators. They are going to throttle it as much as possible in order to gobble up more money. And YouTube, Razorfist is kind of correct. Yes, YouTube wants to move towards being more TV-like. I think it's a terrible idea. I think they're going to end up collapsing their own company inevitably, which is why I'm branching out so much into alt tech. By the way, Daily Motion, link in the description along with all the others. Yes, absolutely. Standalone video is now an afterthought on the platform built by standalone amateur video. It's really, really a sad statement about the direction of these sites. And YouTube has handled this transition the best of these companies. Like Twitter's way out in left field. Facebook is collapsing completely. Amazon's the only one above the fray. It's like some people point out, well, they have censored stuff. Yes, but is it on the same order of magnitude as 1 million people a month getting banned off Twitter? No, not even remotely. Okay, so they banned certain subjects. Trust me, that is nothing compared to the kind of censorship that Zuckerberg metes out on a regular basis. It's still, Amazon and YouTube are the least censored, which is hilarious of the big tech firms. It's like Apple has joined the pigs in the mud now, too. It's really funny to see. It's not funny so much as concerning, but no. There is no war on the legacy media. The legacy media is making so many mistakes that there's no war needed on them. They're already dying off. They're using Trump as a scapegoat to excuse their low ratings, ultimately. It's a scapegoat. That's about all. Peace out.